Better. Welcome to Crossover Day 2022. I can't wait. I don't know about y'all.
House Speaker David Ralston's welcome to the start of what will be a long crossover day as dozens of bills are voted on under the Gold Dome. Good evening and welcome to Lawmakers on Legislative Day 28 and our hour-long crossover day special. I'm Donna Lowry in Atlanta. This is the day bills must be passed out of one of the two chambers in order for them to have the chance of becoming law before the legislative session ends April 4th. Among the bills that passed today, one imposing harsher penalties on people who commit crimes during protests, another providing college aid for certain students, and another helping companies who want to sell medical marijuana. We will also have analysis from two journalists who have closely covered the legislative session. But first, let's get the latest from our Capitol correspondent, Brenda Waters. Hi, Brenda.
Hey, Donna, it's a voting marathon going on down here at the state capitol. It's bills, bills, and more bills, and here were some of them hot off the press. House Bill 1435 is a financial aid program for students.
What we seek to do in this legislation is to help eligible students who have a financial gap, a small gap to get across the finish line, to finish their certificate or their degree program with a grant of up to $2,500.
Eligible students must complete a federal student aid form and must have exhausted all other financial aid options. HB 1435 passed 171-3. A 3-year pilot program designed to provide medical coverage for the diagnosis and treatment of certain mental disorders among children, HB 1484, passed unanimously.
This bill provides coverage for diagnosis and treatment of 100 up to 100 children through the State Health Benefit Plan for PANS, which is a pediatric autoimmune neuropsychotic disorder.
Representative Beth Moore talked about her teenage niece, Alexis, who suffers from this illness.
It is incredibly important that we fight for medical communities to recognize PANS as a legitimate disease so that insurance companies will begin to pay for the treatments of this, much like my beautiful niece Alexis had to undergo. So thank you for supporting this bill. Thank you for the chairman for bringing it, and thank you all for your favorable consideration.
Thieves are ripping off motorists by taking catalytic converters. Some members of the House have been victims to this crime.
House Bill 1528 creates new penalties for criminals that are stealing catalytic converters off of vehicles by laying under the vehicle and using a sawzall to remove the catalytic converter. The process to steal a catalytic converter can just take mere minutes. The reason for the theft is to scrap the metal for the precious metals that are inside of these catalytic converters.
But the cost to insurance companies to replace them can go as high as $4,000. The Senate was no exception. Bills passed. SB 609. It will help companies that want to sell medical cannabis oils, something that has been bogged down for the last 2 years, as cannabis companies have struggled to get the necessary licenses issued. And Senate Bill 353, which would allow judges to have discretion about suspending a driver's license from someone who failed to appear for certain traffic violations.
In Georgia, a driver's license means a job. If you have one, you can work. If you don't, 80% of Georgians drive to work, and half of Georgians lose their licenses, lose their jobs. It's that simple.
Bills and resolutions, not so lucky. Senate Resolution 131. It would allow Georgians to vote on a constitutional amendment to allow parimutuel horse betting in the state. But the vote on the resolution failed to gain the 2/3 majority required and wasn't adopted. A motion to reconsider was immediately requested and passed. It's unknown when that resolution may come up again. SB 601, called the Georgia Educational Freedom Act, would grant a $6,000 scholarship for students and their families that wanted to leave a public school to attend a private school.
Family that's making well above whatever amount you want to put in there,
Yes,
$500,000,
Yes,
can
sir.
still qualify for a $6,000 scholarship for their student?
Yes, sir. As could a minority student making very well below the
the poverty level and could also qualify.
When a child goes to public school, is the expenditure on that child means tested?
No, sir.
So do you mean to tell me, Senator, that when somebody who's in the top 1% of wage earners attends a public school, that we spend the same amount of money for that child?
We do.
As we do somebody who's at the bottom 1%?
We do.
So, Senator, in that way, doesn't this bill mirror what we do in our public school system?
It does, in fact.
That bill failed to pass 20 to 29. Also making news, legislators in the House agreed to give themselves and their Senate colleagues a pay raise. It would increase their current salary from $17,000 to $35,000. Now, if the Senate passes the bill, voters would need to approve the measure in November. That is my Capitol report, Donna, and it's time now to cross over back to you.
Bring it here. We'll see you later on in the show several times, Brenda.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right.
I'm delighted now to have two journalists with me for this 1 hour crossover day special. It feels like reunion day because both of them worked on Lawmakers in the past, and I miss them both. We miss them both.
We miss you.
Thank you. Patricia Murphy. She served as the Lawmakers Capitol correspondent in 2020. She brought with her extensive experience having covered state and national politics, including Congress and the White House. She's now the political insider columnist for the AJC and part of the AJC team that produces The Jolt. Welcome back, Patricia.
Thank you. It's so great to be back.
It's so great. Also returning tonight is Raul Bali. Last year on Crossover Day, he served as a correspondent who gave us up-to-the-minute information on activities at the Capitol during the show. He helped produce the show for many years, and now he's the politics reporter for WABE Radio. Welcome back, Raul.
It's great
You brought
to be
the
back.
jokes with you, too,
I brought the
so
jokes.
glad. Let's start, both of you, with your initial thoughts on the today and what came out of Crossover Day, and let's start with you, Patricia.
Well, so today, right now, Crossover Day is still a work in progress. There are a number of bills just sort of dangling out there that we are still keeping an eye on. They're going to be going, we think, possibly even until midnight. So it's a work in progress. That's my first headline. Second of all, to me, the pay raise was big news. That is going to go to voters on a referendum. I do expect that will eventually pass both chambers. So voters are going to see that on the ballot in 2022 in November. They'll be able to decide if lawmakers should get that. I've actually written a column about this topic for the AJC for tomorrow. Georgia is about the bottom fifth of pay for legislatures around the country, and lawmakers make less than the Atlanta School Board. They make less than the Atlanta City Council. It's a part-time job technically,
right,
but it really takes a lot of time. And my point in my column is that it really is starting to really weed out people who just can't afford to serve in the legislature because of the pay, and this could change that.
Okay, so we're going to get to you in a moment. I know you think I'm skipping you, but I'm not, because we have to go back to Brenda, who has somebody with her right now. And so back to you, Brenda.
All right, thank you, Donna. I have Representative Ron Stevens with me, and you are the primary sponsor of HB 1053, which extends the sunset on the tax credit for Georgia entertainment industry. Extends it about, what, 5 years?
Yeah, 5 years.
How important is this to the state of Georgia?
You know, we started this stuff back in 2008. And we created the film tax incentive back then, and it has turned into a juggernaut with tens of thousands of jobs. And of course, we've got investments of billions, if you will, not millions, but billions. And it's created an entire industry. So once a film is produced in Georgia, then the next step, of course, is to have the post-production piece. All that used to be farmed out to California, New York, and other places. Right now, Georgia's its home, and we've essentially taken over the entire country. We're number one in the country right now for making films, and the post-production tax credit is a piece of that.
Okay. See, I wanted to say that it passed today, by the way, and that was my next question for you. How do we fare with the rest of the country? You just said we're number one now. Everyone wants to come here to make a movie.
On and off, we're number one in the world, or at least we're number one in the country all the time. That used to be the mantra of California and New York. But we have our stars here now, and we have homegrown folks. The movies that are being produced here stimulates tourism through the roof. So it has been an amazing bonanza for Georgia to be number one in the country again in film production, in writing, and also in post-production. And this carries it on for another 5 years.
Okay, we have time for one more question. So let's switch channels now. Let's talk about constitutional carry.
Yes.
You're a supporter.
I am a supporter. You know, at some of these cities that have essentially defunded the police, if you will. People just didn't have an opportunity to protect themselves. So being a signer of constitutional carry, it allows folks in all kinds of situations to protect themselves. You still go through the background checks to purchase a gun, but you won't have to worry about people breaking into your cars, which is a real problem now whenever you have to keep your gun in your car. You can carry it without going to the probate judge, and we're looking for the governor to sign that bill and put it into law.
All right. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. We did get through all your questions.
You did. Thank you so much.
Thank you. All right, Donna, back to you.
Thank you, Brenda. Now back here in the studio, Raul, I want to get your thoughts on the day, the crossover day so far. What stood out?
I think number one is the House Speaker stepping in on medical cannabis oil. I think that was, there have been so many different bills thrown out there, proposed on what to do. And for those who don't know, medical cannabis oil is legal in the state of Georgia, but there's no legal way to buy it. And so a system was set up through the Medical Cannabis Commission. And that commission, it's been going through the process, but it's been taking a very long time. There's now 23,000 people on the patient registry. And so what the speaker did today with the legislation that was on their side of the building is basically work together with 3 lawmakers who were working on it, the representatives Cooper, Werkheiser, and Powell. And basically, it comes down to this. They canceled the 6 licenses that have been awarded, restart that process, but more importantly, for the people who are waiting for this oil, it tells the commission, go find that oil, go procure that oil, and get it to Georgians by mid-August. Now, the question is going to be, can they do that? How is that going to get done? And just to let you know, the Senate also passed their own bill, so it's going to be interesting to see where this all goes next.
And the sticking point really was over the companies that would sell it and the lawsuits, frankly, from the ones who weren't granted the licenses to sell.
Yeah, when I talked to State Representative Alan Powell, that was his number one concern. If this is going to take another 2-3 years to get through the courts before, medical cannabis oil, low THC oil is produced, people have been waiting for a while. So I think what the Speaker's compromise bill on the House side does is go get the oil, get it to people, and we'll sort everything else out at the same time.
Yeah. The other thing we saw today was a movement in terms of the gas tax, which a lot of people have been waiting for, and it looks like we may have some movement. It'll be temporary, but talk about that a little bit, Patricia.
Yes, it will be quite temporary. This gas tax will be suspended, the state gas tax, which really is a nice little chunk of change for Georgians, will be suspended through May 31st through this legislation. It mirrors something that Congress has attempted to do, which is to lift these gas taxes. They do help support the building of roads and bridges and maintenance all around the state. But the governor in this instance and the legislature, we believe now, will be very supportive of this idea that Georgians are really feeling it at the pump. The price of gas has gone up nearly $2 in the last several months. People can really feel it. If you're commuting, people are commuting more and more. And so it's something that is popular with voters. It doesn't look like it's going to blow a hole in the budget because state coffers are quite full and strong. And so it does look like it's the right time, especially with the war in Ukraine, even putting stronger pressure on price increases. It looks like this is something the legislature wants to do.
They want to do it, and so the governor wants to pass it fast.
Absolutely.
Wants to sign it.
And so what we're hearing is, so there were a couple. It came through the Senate Finance Committee today, and then there was a procedural motion. And what it's looking like is this could be on the Senate floor Thursday and in the governor's hands Thursday. And so, and the number that we're hearing is about $150 to $160 million a month. And so, Patricia's right. This is something that they can absorb right now because, and for those who don't know, the number is 29 cents a gallon for unleaded and 33 for diesel. That would make a big difference for a lot of people.
A lot of people will be looking at things a whole lot differently, and they'll want it right away as soon as he does the signature. He better be ready.
But here's an important thing that your viewers should know is when it's signed by the governor, there is actually going to be a lag because the gas that's in your gas station right now, the taxes have already been paid on it. It's the next amount of gas that goes to the gas station that won't be taxed. So there's going to be a little bit of a lag for some gas stations.
Okay, that's important to really get out there because people are just going to be clamoring for this.
Exactly.
Okay, we're going to head back to Brenda. She's at the Gold Dome with another interview. Brenda.
Donna, I have Representative Todd Jones, and we're going to talk about gambling. A lot of those measures are under consideration tonight. You're totally against expanding gambling in Georgia. Can you talk a little bit about that, why you are opposed to it?
Sure. I think there's two real key issues, and I think they all come back to one theme, and that's this intellectual honesty and intellectual dishonesty. So many times we hear the supporters of gambling talking about all the extra revenue the state's going to get. Unfortunately, they don't talk about the direct and indirect costs that the state incurs because of that expansion. And that incursion of costs is anything from gambling addiction, increased mental health, unfortunately sex trafficking, and so many other corollaries that we see with gambling across the country where we see legalization has already occurred.
Okay. And I love it when you talk about your family. It's so compelling when you talk about your son. And you say that gambling and mental health, which is a bill that was passed recently, they kind of intertwine. Can you talk a bit about your son and how you think that this expansion of gambling would deal with mental health?
Sure, absolutely. I think when you think about, there is a cross-section between gambling addiction, and then also mental health, because we see so many times, even in the bill, in SB 142, which talks about expanding on sports betting, you see that they're talking about the sports betting companies would be responsible to provide some type of assistance. They don't really talk about even in detail what that assistance can be. And we think about Justin, my son. My son has been diagnosed with bipolar, with schizoaffect, with depression, and he has addictive personalities. We've seen that in drugs. We've seen that, unfortunately, in his behaviors. This is a young man who literally paces for 18 hours a day, and they subscribe that a lot to, in some ways, genetics, but also to addictive behavior. So for me, I don't want to put into Georgia for 10.7 million Georgians to see something along gambling that really is not necessary, and it's something that's just going to cross over and cause, in my opinion, greater mental health issues and also greater substance abuse issues and greater criminal costs.
So the money many say it will bring to the state isn't worth it.
In my opinion, absolutely not. Because if you're going to talk about the revenue side, let's talk about the cost side. Let's be intellectually honest. And that intellectual honesty has to talk about direct and indirect costs. And those are things that you don't hear the supporters of the bills talk about.
All right. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Donna, back to you.
Thank you so much, Brenda. He talked a little bit about gambling, and he's totally against it. But we're hearing, and earlier today, the Senate took it up. It was voted down but recommitted. And so now we're hearing it may rise again. Actually, tell us what you're hearing.
Yeah, it is now. It's been put on the calendar for this evening. And that's the resolution. That's the voter referendum that's been going to come back.
For horse racing.
This is just for horse racing. So that's one of the things we're going to be following for tonight and keeping an eye on.
Yeah, that's a big one. Why does it seem like every crossover day we're talking about gambling the last few years? Because we may not hear about it until right before crossover day, and then it's a big deal.
Exactly. Well, I think one reason is because, frankly, the gambling lobbyists are very strong. They're a very strong presence down at the Capitol. When I was covering the legislature 2 years ago, there were tons of lobbyists from Wynn Casinos who were in the building, glad-handing with lawmakers, getting in to sort of press their case. It did not get across that particular crossover day. But this year, it's striking to hear Todd Jones raise such a specific policy-based objection, because we have not heard a lot of strong objection like Todd Jones is in the building this year. It's been a lot of, frankly, kind of happy talk about the possibility of pari-mutuel betting, maybe even a combination down the road, pari-mutuel, sports betting, all combined maybe. It is something that feels this year like it has pretty significant momentum on the House side and the Senate side, and to see it recommitted for later this evening, that's a step they typically don't take unless they feel like they have found the votes for it. So this is another incremental step toward getting this finally across the finish line.
And and one other factor, you mentioned that people noticed that it comes up around later in the session. What I kept hearing was this time around, Republican lawmakers who supported it wanted to wait till after qualifying, so they wouldn't pick up a social conservative opponent. So that's the reason suddenly we're kind of hearing that. That's the reason you saw anti-gambling people lay down a marker last week with a press conference.
They did. They had a huge press conference. And so we're going to talk more about that. Maybe something will happen within this hour that we're on. There's still more to come on this hour-long crossover day special of Lawmakers. Stay with us. You're watching Lawmakers on GPB.
Cigna is a proud partner of Georgia Public Broadcasting and Georgia Lawmakers. Cigna's mission is to improve the health, well-being, and peace of mind of those we serve. More at Cigna.com to learn how you can help support your employees' physical and emotional well-being.
Lawmakers is made possible by Georgia Farm Bureau. With over 80 years of helping everyone understand the importance of agriculture in our state. After all, ag is Georgia's #1 industry. Food and fiber production represents over $74 billion in output of Georgia's strong economy. The Georgia Farm Bureau legislative team works to represent producers across Georgia at the state capitol during the session and year-round. Georgia Farm Bureau, the voice of Georgia farmers.
Georgia Humanities, connecting people and communities across Georgia to encourage conversation, education, and understanding. Find out more at www.georgiahumanities.org.
We are the Southern Environmental Law Center. At SELC, we not only take on the toughest environmental challenges, we win, forcing the removal of more than 250 million tons of toxic coal ash, defeating repeated attempts to bring offshore drilling to our coasts, and securing clean air and water protections for communities across our region. Your most powerful environmental defender is rooted right here in the South.
Welcome back to Lawmakers for this special hour-long crossover day. With me are journalists who cover politics, Patricia Murphy with the AJC and Rahul Bali with WABE. But first, we're going to head back to the Capitol where Brenda Waters has a guest. Brenda.
Hello, Donna. I have Senator Elena Parent with me, and we're going to talk about a bill that would impose harsher penalties on folks who protest. Now, you said you voted against this.
I voted against that.
Tell me about
piece of
that.
legislation.
Why?
Well, you know, it's kind of interesting to note that this particular bill is actually over a year old. There are some serious problems with it. Number one problem being it's unconstitutional because it limits freedom of speech. It's unconstitutionally vague as far as what it's trying to set out in the law. And it impedes with the First Amendment right to assembly and to protest and make one's voices heard. Now, are you allowed to commit crimes during protests? No.
That's a different story.
That's a different story.
Okay.
And of course, that is and should be illegal. But this bill suffers from a lot of problems, and it's certainly worth noting that a very similar law passed last year in Florida, and it was promptly enjoined by their courts for being against the First Amendment.
So you voted against it. So what was the final vote? I wasn't in there for that.
It may have been party line, which would mean, and we got a couple people off the floor, so it's probably about 32 to 20. I'd have to go back and look at the exact number, though.
Okay. Overall, how do you think the session is going from a Democratic priority?
You know, I mean, we've certainly gotten some things accomplished. I think we've been able to raise our voices effectively to the importance of things that Georgians care about, like education, job creation, transportation, but it certainly is without a doubt that many of the things that my caucus and that I think Georgians as writ large would like to see done remain undone.
And can you name some of those things?
Certainly, you know, Medicaid expansion. We've passed a whole lot of bills that really seek to micromanage and punish our school systems and our teachers. And, you know, we're vehemently opposed to those. And frankly, there's been a lot of lifting up of made up and manufactured issues related to public education this session in a way that I think is intended to draw a sort of culture war around masks, around vaccines, around whether people can get in the face of the school board members and scream in their face, and then if they get removed, they're mad about that. You know, just, it's been a litany of bills.
Right. Can you talk about CRT?
That's one of them. And you know, that piece of legislation again, seeking to micromanage teachers and shut down conversation. A, it won't work, and B, it's a terrible idea for all kinds of reasons. You know, students are curious. The place to unpack difficult issues within the classroom. It is a very appropriate place to discuss difficult and hard issues and have that push and pull of dialogue and the opening of young minds and critical thinking. You know, if you try to seek to not expose kids to all kinds of things, you're not doing them a service, you know? Right. And the reality is that the offense of, you know, attempting to really micromanage teachers, tell them they can't do their job, not treating them like professionals is really an affront. And we have a serious teacher shortage. And I said in the well, with all these bills coming this year, like 5, 6 of them, I would throw my hands up if I were a teacher too and be like, I'm out of here. The disrespect.
Mm-hmm. All right. Senator, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
You're great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good luck tonight.
Thank you so much.
Donna, I'll throw it back to you.
All right. Thank you so much, Brenda. So here, I want to talk a little bit about one of the things Brenda talked about, and that was about, she asked Senator Parent about the protest bill. Talk a little bit about that today and the discussions we heard.
Yeah, I'm going to put that protest bill in this bucket of public safety bills that we've seen from Republicans since last year and since the protests over social justice. And part of the protests here in Atlanta and other metro areas, there were demonstrations that shut down I-75, I-85, a portion of this bill about not just banning protests, but criminalizing portions of protests includes shutting down roads. The most problematic piece of the bill for Democrats is that it defines a protest as a gathering of 2 or more people doing something that is objectively offensive and could be seen as threatening. I mean, we are two or more people. So there are definitions in the bill that Democrats objected to strongly, and First Amendment constitutionalists also had their own objections to this. But because it is in this sort of bucket of bills, I'll put it with constitutional carry. There was a bill last year that passed, don't let cities defund the police, sort of this bucket of issues on public safety. I think these are all part of that message from Republicans. And when we talk to Republican lawmakers, we know that they are getting ready for some of their own primaries. They feel like they need to take some of these conservative bills back to their voters and say, look at what I've done for you since these events that transpired. And so I think that's how I see it in that vein. And we certainly saw some Democrats protesting, but Republicans saying this is needed. You can't shut down an expressway.
Yeah, we had some protesters at the Capitol today, and what was interesting about having those protesters is they were there with gates or a fence around the Capitol that wasn't there before. So that even that look of when you protest at the Capitol is altogether different. Anything you wanted to add on that?
I think what I'm watching for is not only how it's used in the primary, but then how it's used, how these bills will be used in the general election. That's the other thing I'm going to watch, because as much as the conversation is around what happens in the primaries, getting out the vote in the fall is going to be interesting to watch too.
Okay. Well, we're going to go to the Capitol, but in a different way. Joining us from the Capitol to talk about the day in the House is Speaker Pro Tem Jan Jones. Welcome to Lawmakers.
Well, thank you, and thank you for having me.
Well, let's talk about crossover day. How do you think it's going so far?
Actually, it's been a relatively smooth crossover day. This is my 20th, and it doesn't feel as frantic as I've seen in the past. It's actually run very smoothly.
Yeah. So what bills do you consider important that you'd still like to see come through before the night is over?
Oh my gosh. Well, most of what I've been watching and interested in has gone through prior to today. We did pass a bill that I think will be very helpful, and that is what we're calling gap funding for higher education. If a student is has completed 80% of their coursework for a degree, they could apply through their college for gap funding to help them finish the drill. So for example, if they lose their daycare, or they can't put tires on their car, or which will impede their ability to pay tuition, and they've exhausted all other financial aid, there would be funding there. It's a $10 million fund that, of course, we could increase in the future. But it's, I think, a really important piece of legislation.
Yeah, definitely overwhelming support for that today. You were a big proponent of two bills that passed out of the House recently, HB 1178, the Parents' Bill of Rights bill legislation, and 1084, the teaching of, quote, divisive concepts on racial matters. Do you think either of those bills have any teeth?
Any teeth?
When it comes to if they become law.
Oh, I think they certainly have a good chance. I also worked on an obscenity bill that actually is a technology reform. It seemed to dust up some interest in the beginning, but in the end it passed overwhelmingly with 136 out of 180 votes. And for the first time in 10 years, we've updated our technology, and with all this online learning that we've seen during the pandemic, it's very important that we protect children when they are using a school-issued device or accessing the internet through a school-enabled browser, that we protect them from age-inappropriate material. That could be both sexual in nature, but it could be extreme violence, just anything like that. And so it was a widely supported bill, one that I worked with Representative Irwin on personally. The other two bills I worked on some. The Parent Bill of Rights takes almost all rights of parents that are currently in law and simply makes sure that they're transparent and that teachers have, or that parents are aware of them, and that there's a process if they want to be involved or if they object to something.
Good evening, Speaker Pro Tem Jones. It's Raul Bally from WABE Radio. I wanted to ask you on divisive concepts and on Parental Bill of Rights, the discussion point of once you get down the line and you feel like a school or a school system hasn't followed the rules, what is going to be the tool to, maybe not the word punish, but to keep schools in line? Is it going to be going through QBE funding? Do you see leadership going towards the property tax route, going through waivers, or just private right to action, suing civilly? Where's leadership going?
It's certainly not private right to action. It's definitely not QBE funding, and it's not other types of punishment that you mentioned. What it does do is very narrowly, with regard to the divisive concepts, if a school system, and it's not at the teacher level, it's at the system level, if they continue to make as a part of their curriculum, and school systems are the ones who take the state standards and implement it with curriculum, if they are teaching concepts that are inappropriate at that age and teach hate, frankly, then they could, through a long due process up to the State Board of Education, could narrowly lose a degree of flexibility, what you referred to as waivers, with regard to that curriculum.
Well, thank you so much, Leader Jones, for coming on the show. And thanks for joining us on your 20th crossover day.
That's right. That's right.
Thanks so much. Enjoy the rest of the evening.
I have every confidence. Thank you. It's going to be a good night. We're going to do good things for Georgia. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you. So she talked about a number of things there, and you know, a lot of what she's done has focused on kids even at the college level or in the K-12 level. And any thoughts on some of the things she brought up?
I thought it was so interesting that she said a lot of what she's done has already been taken care of ahead of crossover day. This feels different from some of the other crossover days that I've covered, in that the really big ticket items are not in question. They still need to pass another chamber, but in terms of the governor's tax cut, in terms of the pay raises and the budget, obviously the budget would have gotten done already, critical race theory, divisive issues, constitutional carry, this has been a very front-loaded session, and so everything that we're seeing now on crossover day are these mostly more narrow, tailored pieces that they still want to get across the line, and that some of them are harder to get across the line. Gambling is certainly in that bucket. Changes to voting laws also in that bucket. So it's getting down to the wire here of the issues that are their remaining priorities. But the really big pieces have already had a lot of attention.
Yeah, it's an election year. That's part of it, right? Yep. That's probably why we saw so much passed already.
And you know, to follow up what the question that I asked her, you know, when these bills started, there was a wide range of different punishments and tools, whether it was QBE or you know, getting some money back from a property tax. It looks like going into that waiver area is where it's going to be. And you know, it is interesting that now both divisive concept bills do not include the University System of Georgia. That was the other thing that I've noticed, that in the end, kind of, you heard two discussion points. First of all, can it even be enforced? You know, because of the relationship between the state and the Board of Regents, but also that you know, kids who are in college are adults, and if they pick a course on a divisive topic, that's up to them.
Yeah, if they started off with school districts going to be, you know, looking to be punished. They were looking to actually put some teeth in terms of money taken away from school districts, but they backed away from all of that as it went through the process, which tells you a lot about the process, doesn't it?
It tells you about the process. It tells you about the feedback that they've gotten from educators, for one thing, even from other parents and from their fellow lawmakers, to say maybe even in principle this is something that even fellow Republicans could support. But when you get into the idea of actually withdrawing funding for underlying curriculum, when you talk about having a possibly even giving parents the right to sue school systems over something that's taught in the classroom, is that a road they want to go down right now? And so this is really what the process is also all about, putting these proposals forward. Some of them are a bridge too far. They get narrowed down to see if they can get a majority vote.
Yeah, you really do get an idea of really how the sausage is made from the beginning to the end.
Welcome to the sausage machine.
That's it. So we're going to get another break in, and I think we're going to have a chance to see what's going on in the Senate real quick while we do that, but we'll be back with more of Lawmakers.
Still can't wait to meet the House rep that carries it. I've got a couple of recommendations. Senator from the 44th has asked for unanimous consent that Senate Bill 108 be taken off the table. Is there objection? Chair hears none, and Senate Bill 108 is removed from the table. The chair recognizes.
Cigna is a proud partner of Georgia Public Broadcasting and Georgia Lawmakers. Cigna's mission is to improve the health, well-being, and peace of mind of those we serve. More at Cigna.com to learn how you can help support your employees' physical and emotional well-being.
Lawmakers is made possible by Georgia Farm Bureau. With over 80 years of helping everyone understand the importance of agriculture in our state. After all, ag is Georgia's #1 industry. Food and fiber production represents over $74 billion in output of Georgia's strong economy. The Georgia Farm Bureau legislative team works to represent producers across Georgia at the state capitol during the session and year-round. Georgia Farm Bureau, the voice of Georgia farmers.
Georgia Humanities, connecting people and communities across Georgia to encourage conversation, education, and understanding. Find out more at www.georgiahumanities.org.
We are the Southern Environmental Law Center. At SELC, we not only take on the toughest environmental challenges, we win, forcing the removal of more than 250 million tons of toxic coal ash, defeating repeated attempts to bring offshore drilling to our coasts, and securing clean air and water protections for communities across our region. Your most powerful environmental defender is rooted right here in the South.
Welcome back to Lawmakers on this special hour-long crossover day. We are enjoying a lot here with a reunion of sorts with journalists who cover politics, Patricia Murphy with the AJC, Rahul Bali with WABE, who used to work on this show. So I'm glad to have them back. So we want to talk about something that kind of surprised people today, and that is that there was a bill dealing with the Buckhead cityhood came back to life.
So State Senator Jeff Mullis filed two bills. He filed one bill. It was the same. Bring back the cityhood, but create the city of Buckhead. But there was a second bill that dealt with the Atlanta public school system, and the way it rewrote the charter was that students who are in Buckhead City would have access to Atlanta public schools. That was the other bill. And so when I saw those two bills on first readers this morning, I just said, let's see what happens when it gets assigned to committee. And what happened with the first Buckhead City bill, Lieutenant Governor Jeff Duncan, again, assigned it to the Urban Affairs Committee. It's an all-Democratic committee, which effectively kills it again. So it was interesting that the bills popped up, and then they went away the same way.
So it's crossover day. Anything will happen, and they'll try for
and
something.
Anything won't happen.
No.
In this case, won't.
So they knew it probably wouldn't go far. I mean, I know Senator Mullis, but he went ahead and filed these bills anyhow.
I think the Buckhead City supporters thought it might get a little further today than it got, which was to quickly be tossed into the trash can, essentially. I think that it felt like maybe a box to check. It seemed like a commitment that Senator Mullis had made to the supporters of Buckhead Committee. The Buckhead Committee supporters had told us for months these bills were coming. Trust us, they're coming. They're going to pass. Everything's going to be great. Most of those things have not ended up coming to pass, but it does feel like they were checking the box. We got this bill introduced. Even to read that bill that was changing the charter of Atlanta Public Schools to include students that would not be in their city, that would have raised months of debate within these two chambers in terms of the question of local control, going in and changing a school system's charter, going in and making students eligible in a city where they do not live. There were many, many, many questions about the legislation even before the debate started. And it looks like that's just not going to happen this year.
And I want to, I think our audience and your audience absolutely knows what's going on. But I still think it's important to point out, because I get the question a lot, why is this different from Brookhaven? Why is this different from Vinings? Why is this different from East Cobb? Because this is removing a city from an existing city. I still am giving this explanation out to people who keep asking me, why is this different? Why is this different? That's why it's different, because all those other cities are being carved out of counties. That's what makes this different.
And people don't understand it. It really is worth repeating, so I'm glad you did. The other thing about this, and because it came up again, are we going to see it maybe again added on, tucked on to something else, tacked on to something else?
I just don't think so, because depending on who you talk to, Buckhead cityhood, because it's a city coming out of a city, I've heard it has to be in 2 bills. I've heard from some people it maybe needs to be in 3 bills. So you're talking about attaching language to 3 different bills. It's hard enough to pass 1 bill attached to a bill. 3 or even 2 is going to be really difficult.
But people don't understand. We make a big deal out of crossover day, but there's still a possibility that legislation that doesn't make it today, pass out of either chamber, can still get tacked on or Frankensteined, as we said, onto another
There's always
bill.
that possibility. Senator Jeff Mullis, who is the chair of the Senate Rules Committee, decides what goes on the Senate floor, said yesterday, hey, let me teach you some of my tricks because I've got them. Crossover day is not the end. So we know anything could happen. But on Buckhead City in particular, the House leadership has said they're not interested in moving this. The Senate leadership, in the form of Lieutenant Governor Jeff Duncan, has shown he not only is not interested in moving it, he is actively blocking it right now. We're getting down to a short number of days. We've got every member of the Atlanta delegation against it, every member of the Buckhead delegation against it. Even the representative from Buckhead, Georgia, who is a Republican, is against it. And so they need to start picking up some supporters and not so many people actively opposing it to be realistic. And at this point, it's very hard to see.
And I think it is important to point out the new mayor. Andre Dickens has been to the Capitol a lot. Not only the times that you've seen him on the media, but there are a number of lawmakers who say, who came to my office today? The mayor came to my office today. I think he said he's come to the Capitol now 8 or 9 times. And so I think the work that he has done has basically caused change the dynamic, and lawmakers feel like at least give him a chance.
Yeah, I think that's what we're hearing from everybody. Okay, we're going to change gears again because we're going back to the Capitol where Brenda Waters has another guest. Brenda.
Hey, Donna, Representative James Beverly is with us right now. We're going to talk about the elections bill, and that would be HB 1464. Democrats oppose this bill. There was a protest out front this morning. Can you talk about why you oppose this measure?
Yeah, I mean, it's a continuation of SB 202 last year. It's just another continuation where, they're now leaning into on 1464, they're leaning into the fact that you have outside organizations that could sponsor water or food or whatever it is when you're in these long lines. They're saying absolutely not. They want any outside money coming from other organizations to help maybe smaller counties, maybe smaller municipalities, maybe smaller, less developed census tracts. They're saying, you can't get any extra money, which creates an added problem with just trying to help people to stay in line for longer. The other thing that's problematic about the bill is that at one point you had to have one machine for 250 people. And now they're saying you have to have one machine depending on how many people are left to vote. Well, how do you know that? Who does a regression analysis or forecast to figure out how many people are left? And so what you do is you wind up shrinking the amount of machines that people can vote on, thereby depressing the vote, and there's no way anyone can tell what that is.
Okay, let's talk a bit about drop boxes. Should various governments control their own drop boxes?
Yeah, I think that, we should make voting a lot more easy for people to do in this country of freedoms. But it seems that Republicans are hell-bent on taking away our freedoms when it comes to voting, with freedom of speech, and you name it, and today is no exception to the rule.
Okay, all right. Your feeling about tonight, crossover night, tonight?
Yeah, this is my I think it's my 10th crossover, and it's sort of the same. Is you get a bunch of stuff that happens in the beginning, and then the next 5 hours are going to just be long. And you just got to keep your wits about you, see that nothing crazy is going to come up that can put Georgians in danger from my standpoint, and then just kind of lean into it. But right now, we're right in the midst of the storm, and you just lean into it, see what's there. But it feels similar to what it's always been. A lot of the, as we would say, craziness happened earlier in session, and so today is like cleaning up what we need to do in the House to move forward to get the Senate stuff coming on over.
I have one more question. When something like 1464 does go through, what do you tell your constituents when it goes through? How do you explain that to them?
Yeah, the good news is my constituents are smart, which I think most Georgians who vote are smart. And what I would say to them is one word and one word only: vote. You got to vote these people out. I mean, it's just, this is an election year. It's a great election year. We're gonna have a new governor, God willing, but we got to vote. We got to vote our conscience. We got to vote. Good people got to get in. And so the one way to change all of this foolishness that's happening up here, you got to get out and vote.
All right. Thank you so much.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Okay. Good luck tonight too.
Thanks.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Brenda. Thank you.
Okay,
Thank you so much, Brenda.
Thanks so much.
All right. So just quickly, any thoughts on what he had to say in terms of the bill and the elections bill?
The elections bill, I'm interested that he focused on the outside money that cannot come into the state. There was a flood of money, tens of millions of dollars during the 2020 election to local county governments. And that was really to help them get PPE, to get screens up during COVID. These local governments were saying, we do not have the money to get ready for this election. And although some of the foundations that came in were the Chan Zuckerberg Foundation put in a ton of money, which is, of course, Mark Zuckerberg's foundation with his wife. And so that was money that Republicans felt like was partisan, was not trustworthy, and was being spent in counties where maybe the Zuckerberg Foundation had an interest instead of just sort of spreading it equally throughout the state. So that was their objection, but it really is going to put some of these counties in a bind. I think they believed they might have had a new source of funding if they needed it in a pinch to get ready for these big elections, and now that's not going to be available.
Yeah, I think we're going to have the author of the sponsor of the elections bill in just a moment. Brenda's going to have, but let's talk about something is going on right now down there.
So right now the House is taking up Representative Scott Holcomb's Wrongful Conviction Compensation Act, and for those who don't know, right now if someone's wrongly convicted of a crime, and then they're exonerated, every single case is handled as a separate bill. It's a separate bill that says so-and-so committed this crime, he was exonerated, and again, here's the amount of money. What Scott Holcomb is proposing is a single panel, a review panel, to make it more consistent. A consistent, whether it's the amount of time and the amount of money for what crimes. It's the idea of it should be a uniform process. And so that's what that bill will do. In the end, the legislature still has to approve it and still has to fund it through appropriations, but that's what's on the House floor right now.
It won't be a big flood of bills, one for each person.
Exactly,
okay.
Which is what's done right now.
Okay. We'll see how that goes. Brenda has another interview, and she has the sponsor of the elections bill, HB 1464.
Yes, I do.
Go ahead, Brenda.
Representative James Burchett is with us. That's right. HB 1464. You're the sponsor of the bill. Democrats fiercely oppose it. Why do you think it's needed?
It's just practical common sense cleanup measures and security measures. I don't know why there is such opposition to this bill. This bill puts into code measures that unify or uniformly codify chain of custody for ballots. It expands voter access to the poll. It creates a provision that allows for GBI to have original jurisdiction. These are all common sense measures. I'm not sure what the opposition is about.
Do you think that having the GBI involved in investigating what goes on at the polls, is that intimidating for the voters?
Oh, no. Frankly, I believe that GBI can already investigate elections issues. The only change that we're making is making it original jurisdiction. In other words, they don't have to have an agency like Secretary of State or a local government request that they do investigations. They've already been doing investigations over the years. Who doesn't trust the GBI? I mean, it's the highest law enforcement agency in the land. It's not putting them over the administrative tasks of elections. This is just a good measure to secure the vote.
A lot of groups are gearing up to fight against this bill. There was a protest out front today. What's your response to everything that's going on around this bill?
Yeah, again, I have to kind of go back to if they would read the bill, I think they would find that this bill is a bipartisan measure that doesn't put anything that restricts poll access. It doesn't do anything that I can see that would have these folks up in arms like this. There's nothing there. It's simply just read the bill.
Okay, one more question for you. Will the bill have more responsibility with smaller election departments?
Say that again, please.
I'm getting this in my ear. Will the bill have more responsibility with more election departments?
So the provisions for chain of custody require that when ballots are moved, that the ballots are moved in a sealed box. So whether it be a sealed cardboard box or hard plastic box, that's to be determined by each individual county, and it requires that we have a chain of custody form or sheet. So every time the box is moved or opened, then we know who touched it and why they touched it and what they were doing with it. It will. Most of these Board of Elections and Board of Registrars are already performing tasks such as this. This just creates some uniformity in those chain of custody provisions.
So nothing new?
Nothing new.
All right. Thank you, sir.
I appreciate your time.
All right. Thank you so much. All right. Okay, Donna, back to you.
Thank you so much, Brenda. The whole idea that this bill didn't come out until last week. The hearings were last week, and yet it's moving along quickly. And we've got the May primary coming up soon. You know,
one of the things I'm going to be watching once we make the turn away from the legislature and start following the May primaries, the June runoffs, is the effect of SB 202 on a major election. We saw it in the city of Atlanta, but with their mayoral races and the others around the state. But what is the effect on election workers, poll workers? Are they going to have any challenges, recruiting poll workers? That's something I'm definitely going to be watching is the effect on poll workers and election officials, whether it's workload or them just wanting to continue to do this kind of work.
We're already hearing some poll workers are saying a lot of them are retiring, but a lot of them, this has been a lot on them. The 2020 was a lot. They were intimidated. Some of them were threatened. Yeah. So, just getting people to want to be poll workers is tough.
Absolutely. One piece of this bill does include a provision to criminalize making threats against poll workers, to make that its own distinct criminal penalty that would be associated with that, because this was just so incredibly prevalent and so disturbing. And we cannot conduct elections without election workers. We have to protect those workers. And I think there was uniform agreement on that piece of the bill.
Yeah. Well, as we wrap up, because we're going to have to wrap up eventually, even though we'll be going back down to the Capitol, see what's going on. We have to talk about how this crossover day is different for a lot of people who will not be here next year, who some of them we just found out are not going to be running again. It's the final crossover day for Jeff Mullis, for instance. Senator Mullis is one of them.
Yep, he just recently he announced his retirement.
No.
But there is a slew of lawmakers, and when you combine them, we're looking at hundreds of years of experience walking out the door. In addition to Jeff Mullis, there's Calvin Smyre, the longest serving member of the State House, an absolute institution and quite beloved in that building.
Since 1974.
By everybody in that whole chamber. Terry England, who's the chairman of the House Appropriations Committee, people are scared because he knows so much and he's walking out the door with all of that knowledge. I'm sure he'll be replaced by a knowledgeable committee chairman, but there is just so much institutional knowledge. You go over to the Senate, Jeff Duncan will be leaving the chamber. Other members who are running for statewide office will not be returning. That is President Pro Tem Butch Miller. You're looking at Burt Jones. These people are not coming back because they're running for different offices. And so the next session will be very, very different. And a lot of it is because the Senate and House especially are losing these old hands and these especially people who I think people believe that they have an even temperament. They have disagreements, but not feuds, not fights, and that sort of demeanor and character is something that is really going to be missed as well.
And in a perfect example, State Representative Terry England, Calvin Smyre, trusted by both sides.
Yes.
And you know what? An interesting thing with Jeff Mullis leaving is maybe this is a question we need to ask Lieutenant Governor candidates. What are your chairmen going to look like when you run for? And I'm working on a story where I've talked to lawmakers who are leaving about, why are you leaving? What do you want to see change? One of the things that at least one lawmaker mentioned, he goes, no matter who's in control, they need to have more chairmen from both parties in different committees and committees that have a closer number of Republicans and Democrats.
That's an interesting, and the fact that, we're losing people who work together well and know how to work together well. So we have to wrap up the show. I loved having you have this reunion with you guys coming back. So thank you so much for being with us today, Raul and Patricia. And thank you for joining us tonight on Lawmakers for this special 1-hour crossover day show. The show is ending, but GPB's coverage of this day at the Capitol continues. We'll keep you updated on Twitter throughout the night and on our GPB digital pages. And tune in tomorrow for a full wrap-up on Lawmakers and Legislative Day 29. Have a good night.